Happy Thursday. Welcome to the show. This is Sandy and Sean. That's Sandy Clough. I'm Shawn Drotar. This is My Life Sports. Thanks so much for joining us today, watching the program. Always great to see each and every one of you. Sandy, the Denver Broncos minicamp comes to an end today. You would say merciful end, but it's only 3 days, and there's not contact in it.
But there wasn't a third day.
There wasn't really a third day. So presumably, that's a good sign, and Sean Payton and his staff saw everything they really needed to see. I do wonder if we'll hear all the low-hanging fruit types talking about, oh no, a field day. When the Broncos are a bad team, they were a losing team last year. They need to be doing all the extra work. But again, kind of shows you how much that I think the coaching staffs understand about the real value of this as opposed to what people think it actually is.
Absolutely. You nailed it. I won't say that the OTAs are much ado about nothing, nor would I say that about the minicamp, but it's much ado about next to nothing.
Their value is limited.
Here's the proof that a hardcore old school coach like Payton has no trouble and claims he did this well in advance of what he saw on Tuesday and Wednesday in the practice field. He decided this days, perhaps weeks ago, that this mini camp would last 2 days, not 3. I think part of it is that, as Troy Rink suggested today in the Denver Post, and we have talked about at length, Peyton's a little more laid back, a little more relaxed during this period than he was a year ago at this very time. But he is still an old school coach. And the fact that he has no problem in not even scheduling a field day, really.
No.
We've seen those before. Guys do show up. Here, guys might as well be on a plane to Las Vegas or maybe a place slightly cooler than Las Vegas is these days.
Certainly.
But he canceled the entire practice, which to me shows that the whole idea of, remember, 3 days and each of the quarterbacks would get a run with the starters. To me, it's further evidence that while there is competition at cornerback for the second spot on the outside opposite Patrick Surtain, perhaps at tight end, there's competition. Even at wide receiver, there may be competition. There is no real competition at quarterback. And so you couldn't have 2 days of practice and give all 3 quarterbacks significant reps with the first team. Give each quarterback a day.
Mm-hmm.
You didn't have 3 days. You only had 2. And I would also suggest, given the reaction back in New York to the absences, unexcused apparently, of Hassan Reddick,
who's got a contract holdout, but Aaron Rodgers,
and Robert Saleh saying the other day, yes, it's an unexcused absence, but yes, we also know exactly where he is and what he's doing. And it's no big deal.
As long as Aaron Rodgers doesn't mind the fine, what do they care?
Well, right. And Aaron Rodgers can afford to
certainly
pay whatever fine the Jets impose. And you know something? I'm not sure they will. I don't know that there's any way of enforcing this rule.
Oh, they won't
that the NFL has anything to do with, and the clubs can fine or not fine a player. I mean, Cortland Sutton had about as much to do as we did with the activity that took place this week out at Dove Valley.
Right.
He didn't do anything. I guess yesterday he was participating in some of the team drills, but he didn't scrimmage either day. He was more or less working off to the side, as were several Broncos who never really practiced with the team this week. And that includes at least one defensive lineman who didn't, from anything we've been given to understand, have an injury or anything like that. He just didn't participate. And for a defensive lineman, I don't know what kind of value there is in a minicamp anyway.
You can't actually rush the passer. You can't engage with the offensive lineman. So, who knows? But obviously for the Broncos, this minicamp is complete. Peyton said actually after that said he canceled it with the team in the early morning team meeting, said there wasn't going to be a need for practice. Said historically prior to, and he means 2011 with the last changes, you had 40 off-season days, and then after that it greatly reduced. Prior to that, CBA, you almost always had to find a day where you were doing something different. But after 2011, it got reduced to 10 OTAs, your mini camp, and your weightlifting. It's just a little harder to plan a day. In other words, even for a coach, he understands that weightlifting and things isn't really going to make a huge football difference. And so why not just save those energies for when this team can actually do a little bit more with it? So the Broncos finish their mini camp, but getting some players back to health and getting a feel for how they're going to function is a lot of how this Denver Broncos team is going to go. And that will take place more in training camp and in the preseason and in the early parts of the season. But yesterday, Baron Browning, one of the more important members of the Denver Broncos defense, and I say that knowing that Browning had 4.5 sacks in 10 games last year. He's had 9.5 sacks in 24 games over the last 2, which, you can break it down. It's not a big sack number, but he's one of the guys on the team that the Broncos feel has a significant amount of upside when it comes to rushing the passer. And Denver's been moving inside guys to the outside for a couple of years. Browning was one of those. And the Broncos think that he may be ready to finally, if healthy, have that full season. One of the challenges, Sandy, is the if healthy part. He's played in 38 out of a possible 51 games. Hasn't played a full season yet. That's still basically 75%. Not disastrous, but you would love to see more if Baron Browning is going to hit his peak. He talked yesterday about the idea, though, of bringing defense back to Denver in a way that historically has been something that's been a real source of pride for the organization.
I think that's just always been our mentality. I mean, I think that's what Denver is known for, is having a great defense. That's what we always rely on, is having a great defense. So we got to keep that mentality, and I don't see that changing out. Great teams have a great defense, and great defense win championships. So that's our goal, and that's our mission here. So we got to have a great defense to do that.
Historically, you really still do have to have more or less, if not a great defense, a pretty good one. Although, actually, if you were to look at it statistically over the last almost 15,
great offensive teams
years,
do better than great defensive
the offensive teams do better. But the Denver Broncos, last time they went to the playoffs and won a Super Bowl, were definitely a defense-first team, as well as back in 1977 when they went to their first Super Bowl with the Orange Crush. And that I looked at a little bit, because obviously he's talking about what the Broncos are known for defense. And I doubt Baron Browning was talking about the Orange Crush and Randy Gradishar, who will be inducted into the Hall of Fame now after his election. But I thought about it a little bit, because I looked back at that team and realized I know they weren't actually big sack totals on those teams. Granted, something we've talked about forever on this program is that sack totals are great. Sacks are great. But sacks create punts. Pressures create turnovers. Pressures create the kind of things that break open games. And so you don't have to necessarily look at sacks as a be-all, end-all. But the 1976 Broncos had 32 sacks as a team. That team was over 500, but wasn't elite.
And they were also playing a 14-game season. Let's keep that in mind, as opposed to 17.
Right. And it's less about the total and more about the jump. The very next year, they had 37 sacks. It wasn't a monumental jump, but of course, that was the 12-2 Orange Crush team that went to the Super Bowl, Denver's first. Barney Chavis led the team in sacks both years with 8. Lyle Alzado also had 8 in 1977. But the idea that Browning and his sack totals, he may not have to jump up to 10, 11, or 12 to be an impactful player, as long as the rest of the defense steps up and generates that pass rush.
We've seen more recently, I think, an absence of big numbers individually, certainly here in Denver.
Oh, absolutely.
When was the last time? Was it Bradley Chubb and Von Miller, I think, their first year together that the Broncos had 2018? Am I correct? The Broncos had 2 players who had double-figure sack totals.
Right.
That was the last time. And I don't know that they've had even one in the last 4 or 5 years, maybe even in this decade.
They haven't.
They have not had a 10 sack.
No, in fact, I thought you might
season.
go that way, and I had that one for you, because going back to all the way back, as a matter of fact, to that 2018 year where Von Miller had 14.5 and Bradley Chubb had 12. Worth noting that Shaq Barrett and Adam Gotsis were next on the team with 3. However, I mean, the drop-off was immense. But you go to the 2019 season, and you'll see that some of these numbers maybe aren't as impressive either. Von Miller led the team in sacks in 2019 with 8. You go to the 2020 campaign, and Malik Reed led the team in sacks with 8. 2021, Shelby Harris led the team in sacks with 6. That was a disaster. And then 2022, the moved on since Draymond Jones had 6.5. So, I mean, you haven't come close to even a double-digit sack guy in a while. And the interesting part is Draymond Jones, Malik Reed, Shelby Harris. These aren't guys that you think about around the NFL that even went on to other teams and became top-tier sack guys. The only one that maybe did
Shaq Barrett
is Shaq Barrett after leaving the Broncos. Right. But otherwise, they haven't had big sack numbers or a major sack guy for a while.
They haven't. And I don't know that you necessarily need to have one. I think, though, in a place like Kansas City, Chris Jones may not be absolutely indispensable, but he's pretty close.
With the ability to rush the passer right up the middle.
And he opens things up for other guys because he always has to be double teamed. And this is the fault I'd find with the Bronco pass rush over the last 4 years. Let's just encapsulate all of our analysis within the decade of the 2020s.
And by the way, even in last year's,
there's
the
no
best
one who
year
needs
when
to
it
be
comes
double
to sacks. There's Jonathan Cooper 8.5, Nick Bonito 8. That's the best pair they've had since Chubb and Miller.
But I'm saying that you don't double team anybody.
You don't double team anybody. No. Not on this team. Not at this point.
And you need to find somebody who at least on occasion draws a double team.
Yeah. I think the Broncos thought maybe Zach Allen might have been that guy. He hasn't.
He wasn't.
They traded for John Franklin Myers. I promise that's a pretty good trade, but I don't think teams trip over themselves doubling John Franklin Myers. DJ Jones likely in the middle. No, they don't have anybody who really frightens you that way, but they do have a lot of returning players. And that can be of some value when you're trying to assemble a defense. Browning had a chance to discuss that yesterday as well.
Yeah, I think we have a very talented room, probably one of the more talented rooms that I've been in since I've been here. And I think just the task for us is just to continue to work hard and push one another. We have a lot of guys in our room that can be starters in this league, so, it's not a lot of room for error in our room, so we have to be on point every day, and it just pushes one another to be our best. And I'm embracing it, and I think all the guys in the room are embracing it. And I feel like we have a lot of veterans in our room between me, Coop, and even Nick, so we're just trying to push one another and keep the standard upheld that's been upheld in our room before we even got here.
A lot of guys in the room, he says, and again, I don't mean to parse excessively his words, but he says a lot of guys in the room who can start. I prefer him to say star.
Yeah.
For this team or any other team. He can't say that.
No, but I will say that the front seven, talent-wise, is probably deeper for the Broncos than it's been in a while. Allen Jones and Franklin Myers on the defensive line with Malcolm Roach being added to. Roach is a talented player. Obviously, we talked about Cooper and Bonito with the sack totals. Alex Singleton returns. Browning, of course, we talk about as well. The addition of Jonah Ellis. And if they happen to get Drew Sanders back at any point, that's fine. They also added Cody Barton, a pretty reliable linebacker, too. I think when you're talking about the front seven and depth, it probably is the best the Broncos have had in a while.
Oh, he said one of the best.
Is this going to be enough?
One of the best. And, Vance Joseph got a little carried away, I think, last year when he said it was the best linebacker room he had ever been a part of.
Yeah, I would
including
think so.
Some pretty good ones. Well, at least one in Miami.
He's a pretty
coached there for a year as defensive coordinator. I know, but I think this, again, without being grumpy about it, this is what fans are sick of, these proclamations. And thankfully, you didn't get that exactly from Baron Browning. You got basically the standard fare. We have guys that get a chance to start. Well, I would hope so. That be at least four who have a chance to start. And I don't think any of them are three-down players, though, and that's another one of my issues. And I'm talking about the linebackers specifically, but even along the defensive line, are these
the only one that may be
acquisitions? Browning, maybe, and I'd say that about Browning only because he's played in his football career on the inside and also on the outside, so presumably he can play the run maybe a little better than your standard issue edge rusher. I see potential in Jonah Ellis. As being maybe capable of 8 to 10 sacks a year. I mean, he comes from a defense that is known as having been year in and year out one of the better ones in all of college football at Utah. I would hope that they end up in a place because there's some question marks in the secondary, in a place where they can put steady pressure on the passer. And that just wasn't there. It came and went last year. It was too unreliable. And again, I go back to that Miami game. I know the secondary broke down and made all kinds of mistakes throughout the course of the game. They had no pass rush on Tua. None.
Oh, no.
That day in Miami. I mean,
No.
he was, as they say, sitting back there in the proverbial rocking chair.
Yeah, that has to be a lot better if the Broncos defense is going to be better. But we did talk about that, the great 77 team. And from 177 on that team, Lyle Alzado to number 77 on this team, Quinn Miners. The offensive line, however, may be a little more promising and certainly a little bit more experienced. We'll talk more about that in a moment, but want to remind you, when you want to dig deeper into all the local teams, Mile High Sports has got you covered.
We have everything covered, as a matter of fact, and we are thankful for the fact that so many of you have chosen to subscribe to the Sandy and Shawn podcast. We thank you for that and for listening to our show on demand whenever it fits your schedule. But we have Ryan Blackburn on the Nuggets beat with Pickaxe and Roll, and another podcast, Eric Dean, following the Avalanche. His podcast is called Hockey Mountain High. See, we're very clever with these naming principles.
Yeah, obviously
maybe
you and I weren't naming.
Maybe the Big 12 ought to consult.
Oh my goodness! Don't even go there.
We won't even get into that.
We'll have to get into that tomorrow.
Mile High baseball fans, of course, get the latest on the Rockies with Drew Kreisman on the 20th and Blake podcast, and all questions relating to the Broncos and maybe even a little bit more from time to time. You can get with Troy Rank, the terrific columnist from the Denver Post, on the Broncos podcast, as he is featured on the Mile High Sports Podcast Network. All that and a lot more. Just search Mile High Sports wherever you get your podcasts.
Well, we talked a little bit about Quinn Miners. Quinn Miners, of course, the Broncos' best offensive lineman. There's no question about that. And Miners, the one with the biggest upside, the third-round pick out of Wisconsin Whitewater a couple years ago. Actually, only a handful of picks, 7 to be precise, in front of Baron Browning when the Broncos had a couple of third-round selections. Had a chance to discuss yesterday some of the things about the offensive line. And Miners, I think, has quickly become sort of the captain of that line, despite the fact he is younger than McGlinchey and Bowles and Powers, the other veteran guys that are returning. But Miners is the best one. And Miners seems to be maybe the most interesting one to talk to, as much as Garrett Bowles does like to talk. Again, much like maybe Vance Joseph, maybe a little too effusive in his praise at all times. Miners maybe a little bit more of a straight shooter. Yesterday, he talked about the idea of continuity. And for the Denver Broncos last year, for the first time in who knows how long, their starting 5 played the vast majority of their snaps this year, last fall, to the point where their starting 5 played the most snaps together of any team in the NFL. Now, Lloyd Cushenberry has moved on, signs a free agent deal with Tennessee, and joins the Titans. The center position is up for grabs. But the other 4 most certainly are not. Miners discussed the value of that.
It's been great to come back and have the same staff, same coaches, same familiar faces. It's been really awesome to have the same language, the same kind of plays, the same type of blocks I'm expected to do, where I can spend, the off season before this, process starts, knowing what's expected of me and, what the system actually is. So it's been great.
I think you can reasonably contend that Quinn Miners is one of the premier guards, either left side or right side, throughout the league. With the exception of Surtain on defense, I'm not sure you can say that about any other Bronco.
No,
at
I
any
don't
other
think so.
Position. I think they have 2 players who are clearly of Pro Bowl and perhaps, depending on the year, all-pro consideration. Surtain would be the representative on the defense, and Miners is certainly the best offensive player the Broncos have.
Yes, I think that's fair. And a couple of weeks ago in their preseason rankings, Pro Football Focus ranked Miners, and they didn't separate left guard or right guard, just guard. They put Chris Lindstrom of the Atlanta Falcons first, Joe Tooney of the Chiefs second, Sam Cosmi of the Commanders third, Tyler Smith of the Cowboys fourth, and just ahead of Kevin Zeitler of the Detroit Lions and Zach Martin of the Dallas Cowboys, sitting in 5th, Quinn Miners.
But he's on the front side of his career, and the other 2 guys you just mentioned are on the back side of their careers.
Here's what Pro Football Focus had to say about Miners too. Played in all 17 regular season games for the first time, on his way to an 83.7 overall grade, the third best mark among guards. The third-year pro has improved his overall grade for the past 2 seasons and has quietly taken his place as one of the best guards in the NFL. His 3.8 pressure rate allowed was the 14th lowest in the NFL. That's regardless of position. And his 88.7 run blocking rate ranked second. Miners is showing he could dominate in both run blocking and pass protecting assignments. No easy feat.
He's a guard, so I'm not quite as concerned about his pass protection numbers as I am about the run blocking. And he's a road grader.
Yeah,
I mean, we
had a
loved
pretty
his
good
story.
idea. Yeah, coming out of
college,
right?
We've loved his story from the beginning, but he has turned a good story into something a lot more. He is a very good, if not great, guard right now.
I think that's fair. I mean, I do. When you're talking about a Pro Football Focus ranking of 5th in the entire NFL, they believe he's a great player as it stands. And I think that's one of the things where you look at the Broncos and sometimes when they miss big. But this was a big hit because coming out of the pandemic, it was tough to say. Miner's story was interesting, right? He's out there in the forest lifting logs and water jugs, and right, exactly. It comes in with the big belly and certainly has the fun story, but turns into the kind of player that you hope when you saw that kind of energy in the workouts and the desire. It's all been there. I mean, he has been everything the Denver Broncos had hoped for, and at a very, very good bargain. Don't expect that to last for long, though. This year, $3.5 million cap hit. Next year, he's a free agent. So the Broncos, when talking about some of their overturns and the dead cap money that they have to absorb, most of it this year and some of it next year, Miners is going to need a big deal. If he's really considered by most to be a top 5 guard in the league, he's going to make the big bucks, and he's going to make them fast.
Be making, I would guess, between 8 and 10 million per year. And I don't know
the Broncos
how
were to extend
much
him right
higher birds go. Yes, I think in terms of an extension, yes. What he get on the open market, it's hard to say. Great guards have value, but not as much as great.
They're going to make more than you
do.
think. Well, Lindstrom makes an average salary of $20.5 million. Zach Martin, 18.4. Talked about Tooney. He makes 16. Joel Bitonio, 16 as well. Ben Powers makes 12.8. You're going to have to pay him more than that. I think it's going to be.
I would think so.
Maybe more in the
10 to 15 range.
It's going to be in the 15 to 18 range, I think, is where you're
probably
probably
he's a young player. We'll see how the negotiations go. He's still a young player. I won't say he's unproven, but he is young. He's not Quentin Nelson quite yet.
Right. Nelson makes $20 million at the age of 25. Landon Dickerson of the Eagles makes the most at an average of $21 million a year. But they're going to need to pay him. On the bright side, the Broncos, I don't think are going to have any question to do that. You heard Miners right there talk about the idea of having all of the same people in place, knowing what the expectations are. That's a big part of the opportunity to grow. And if he's comfortable here and flourishing here, and as long as the Broncos come with a market value deal, they'll probably be able to retain him. But Miners was also asked specifically about the goals for this season when it comes to him and the offensive line.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I definitely have personal goals. But right now it's about keeping things small and not necessarily focusing on that. I think I might have focused a little bit too much on that last year of being a Pro Bowl player and almost kind of feeling let down in a sense. But that's not necessarily where I'm focused at anymore. I think that's kind of an individual thing that will just happen as a byproduct of playing well, being consistent, because at the end of the day, the thing that really matters to me most is, postseason football.
Yeah, I would think as analytics become, for better or worse, an increasing part of analyzing players.
And for linemen, they're better because there were virtually no stats.
And there were no stats before, especially for guards. I mean, you went on reputation and perhaps getting a few mentions. I grew up in an age when the best linemen were the most anonymous linemen, because if you got noticed, it was usually for something you gave up, not something you did. They didn't have numbers on pancake blocks back then. Even it was pretty primitive. The forms of analysis when it came to guard play were not exactly what they might be today. But I would think, and he didn't make the Pro Bowl last year, but the Pro Bowl game itself is such a joke. It's a popularity contest. The players have a say in it, and the players don't take the voting seriously because they don't take the game seriously. So I wouldn't view that, and he's honest enough to admit that maybe last year he did, but I think this year and from here on out, if I were in his position, I'd be more honored by the fact that Pro Football Focus grades me out as one of the top 5 guards in the league, as opposed to not having a chance to play in the Pro Bowl.
Yes.
Now, I think all pro is the next level,
right?
And we'll see if he gets to that. And I guess my thinking would be the all pros are in that 15 to 20 range. The people who haven't quite gotten there yet, maybe more in the 10 to 15 range. And I'm talking about guard play. Now, I'm talking about guards in the NFL, not tackles, not centers. Centers don't get paid a lot either.
No,
and they were underpaid. And I'm not saying that guards are paid what they should be paid.
But it definitely goes from the outside in. And this is one of those situations where the Broncos' lack of success also probably hurts minors to an extent.
Absolutely.
Because people look at it and think, well, the team isn't very good. They weren't very good on the ground with their yards per carry average. Not that really had much to do with minors. But this is where one of the challenges are when the Broncos have been irrelevant for so long that people aren't paying attention to them the same way they used to. And
so they aren't featured.
Right.
They aren't featured on national television very often.
And the stats aren't impressive. And there's just kind of the assumption, and perhaps Justin Simmons is suffering from that.
Yes.
They must. I mean, he has a good rep, and people seem to like him, and he has good stats, the most interceptions of anybody since coming to the league. But the Broncos aren't that good, so what does it matter? When you're not featured, you're not seen because you're not relevant, people just go off the numbers, and they assume that the numbers are probably lying to them.
And how many people remember the Bronco defense from that 70-point game against Miami?
Remember
people who pay some attention.
They saw the highlights of that.
One for all its futility. Did they really take the time, though, to investigate that the Broncos gave up those 70 points during a week in which Justin Simmons was hurt and unable to play? I'm guessing probably not.
I think there's a chance that people realize Simmons wasn't.
Would teams be aware of that? Yeah, I would assume they would. But teams are also aware, it's the old theory, hey, they lost with him.
Right.
They could probably lose without him too. I think they will backslide this year, and I think they will miss Justin Simmons, actually. But to people who look at the Broncos as what they've been the last 7 years, and that's a losing football team, what difference does it make if you go 8-9 or 7-10? You're still a losing football team, and you're still not making the playoffs.
Well, we'll talk about that exact topic in a couple of moments with our friend Myck Miller from Fox31 in Denver. What I want to remind you, obviously, is the weather heats up and really heats up. People are out there looking for homes, and in the Denver market, it is obviously a great place to be a seller, but you also want to make sure that in a great market, you still get the best value. And so navigating that home market can be tricky. That's why you need to talk to my friends Dave and Mark at Key Real Estate Group's Colorado Luxury Home Team. When I say the Luxury Home Team, you've probably heard it here before. Not talking about a luxury home, talking about your home and the luxury treatment you will get from Dave and Mark and the Key Real Estate Group, because they treat you, whether you're condos to castles, the way you want to be treated and the way you deserve to be treated, because this is probably the most valuable asset you'll ever own. And if you're looking to sell it, you want to make sure you get the maximum amount of value out of it. And to do that, you need people who know how to ride all the highs and lows, who are experienced and stable. Well, that's exactly what Key Real Estate Group brings you. 25 years in the exact same offices. They're privately held. They get the job done themselves. You're not dealing with whoever the big companies assigned to you. You get them. Inventory is still very low around the Denver metro area. Homes that are priced right sell fast, and a lot of them even sell over their listing price. So let Dave and Mark give you a free valuation so you know exactly in this market what your home is worth. Now that the weather is heating up, folks are already out every single weekend looking for new homes. So there's no reason for you to wait. You want to get your home on the market, priced right and ready to sell. Let Dave and Mark represent you to make sure you're getting everything that you deserve. Here's how to get a hold of them. You call Dave and Mark at the Key Real Estate Group at 720-900-LIST. That's 720-900-LIST. Or visit them today at keyrealestategroup.com. Sandy, you brought up the idea that the Denver Broncos may end up backsliding. I think that they probably will too. I think a lot of people think they will backslide. The 9-8 record that they had last year was 8-9 record. I got ahead of myself. 8-9, still losing.
Losing after all these years.
The best record they had since they won 9 back in the 2016 campaign.
9-7,
right? 9-7 back then. So even
which
better. But
looks like a record that's parade worthy by comparison to the 7 seasons that followed.
You don't think Broncos fans would take 9-8 right now? I bet they would. The question is, can they possibly get there with a rookie quarterback? Joining us to discuss it from Fox 31 in Denver, the host of Colorado Sports Night over at KWGN, as was our friend Myck Miller. And Myck, thank you for joining us. Now the Broncos minicamp is over. Sean Payton said he likes where the team is at this point. Canceled practice today. Minicamp went from 3 days to 2 days. There's always that worry that, when you're bad, you have to have every single solitary practice. Even Sean Payton didn't think it was valuable today. Is that just one of the signs that minicamp is overrated by folks like us in the media sometimes? Or is it the fact that maybe this team is a lot better than people think it might be?
Well, appreciate you guys having me on. This is my 3rd year in Denver, and my first 2 years, I didn't have to worry about mandatory minicamp because we had the Colorado Avalanche making a push for a Stanley Cup, and last year, the Denver Nuggets won the NBA championship. So it wasn't anything that we were really focusing on because at the end of the day, it is just grown men in shorts and a T-shirt running out there and trying to learn the system. So yeah, like when I found out that Sean Payton canceled today's practice, I was like, that's not a big deal. I don't think it's a story at all. I think it's maybe a situation where if you're going to take anything from it, it's a good thing, because if he felt that the players and the team were not taking in the installs that he was putting in during mandatory training camp, he probably would have held today's practice. I think the fact that they did not have today's practice is a good sign, but at the end of the day, Sean talked a lot about it during his press conferences the last couple of days. It's hard to evaluate these players, and especially in certain key positions like defensive end, defensive tackle, offensive line, and running back when you're not having the physicality that comes with what is going to happen at training camp. So, yeah, I think mandatory minicamp is one of those things where we in the media, we get, an opportunity to talk to some of these players and coaches and are able to have good conversations and tell good stories. But from the standpoint of the Denver Broncos, these practices relating to wins, I don't think that anything that happens in June is going to help them in September, October, and November.
Has Sean Payton mellowed, in your opinion?
1,000%. I think that there's a lot of stress that has gone away from him as a result of taking over a franchise that was putrid, to say the least, and trying to figure out a situation where you could fix a quote unquote potential future Hall of Famer and Russell Wilson. I think last year there was a lot of stress that went along with Sean Payton. Not to say that he's not stressed this year, but it seems like the young team has rejuvenated Sean Payton. It feels like he has made a exerted effort to be a lot kinder to us in the media, which obviously we are going to appreciate. But it does feel like that he finally has his guys, the people that he wants to have on his team, as opposed to last year. He inherited a franchise. He inherited a franchise, quote unquote, player in Russell Wilson that he had to then figure out how to fix and or come to the realization that they had to move on. So I do feel like Sean has alleviated some of the pressure and some of the stress that comes with being a coach in his first season with a new team. And so year 2, it feels like Sean Payton's a lot more laid back and relaxed, even though things I'm sure will get a lot more stressful as training camp at the beginning of this season gets started here in August and September.
It seems as if it's going to be really hard to get to 9 wins and move themselves forward, because obviously you're in the AFC West with the 2-time defending champs. The Chargers have added Jim Harbaugh, and the expectations is the Chargers should be a lot better. And the AFC is, again, stacked with outstanding quarterbacks, and the Broncos have a rookie one, albeit one this time around that Sean Payton seems to like and appreciate. But if this team does find itself unable to match the 8 wins of last year, is it more of a situation where it can be a step or 2 backwards to make a leap forward, or is it really depending on how far this team backslides?
Yeah, I think if they win like 3 or 4 games, then we have a lot to be concerned about, but I think the plan always was last year, try to figure things out, and then in year 2, reset and recharge and get things the way that Sean Payton wants them to go. I got them winning about 6 or 7 games this year. I don't think that they have a very favorable matchup as it pertains to their schedule, and then obviously, I believe that they will start Bo Nixon, so you're starting a rookie quarterback with a bunch of guys, which, let's be honest, there's not a lot of elite weapons surrounding Bo Nix. The reason that CJ Stroud was able to put together such an elite rookie season, he had an elite head coach in D'Amico Ryans, and he also had weapons galore that he was able to find. I don't see a lot of those weapons for the Denver Broncos, and I don't think it's a situation where, because you're eating so much of that dead cap money as a result of releasing Russell Wilson, you're not going to be able to go out and get elite weapons for Bo Nix. So I think this is a situation where if they win 5, 6, 7 games, I think that's to be expected in Broncos country. However, if they go and they only win 2 or 3 and it's a really bad season and Sean Payton's not happy and Bo Nix is not showing any progression as the season progresses, then there's a situation where Broncos country is going to have to be like, where do we go from here? Because if there is a little bit of glimpse of hope this season, I think Broncos country will live with that, because I think that's essentially the plan. But they cannot allow one step back to get to the future to turn it to 2, 3, 4 steps back. So it's going to be a situation where you're not going to really going to evaluate this team via wins per se, but it's really going to be what kind of production does Bo Nix, this offense, and honestly the defense as well, put out on the field. Because if it's something that is not something that Sean Payton's going to like, it'll be interesting to see how then he's going to be able to spin this, because you do have a rookie quarterback now, and so you're able to buy yourself maybe a year or 2. But if that rookie quarterback ends up not being the guy, sorry, Zach Wilson and Jarrett Stidham aren't guys that can step into that role and then be franchise quarterbacks.
Well, of course not. And that's why so many of us, including you, believe that Bo Nix will be the starting quarterback from day one. But your point about the absence of weapons is a good one. And we were just talking about Quinn Miners as being the Broncos' best offensive player by far. And, of course, the time will come here in the fairly near future that the Broncos will have to pay Quinn Miners. And, of course, at some point they have to pay Patrick Surtain too. But my question to you would be, is it good news or bad news that Quinn Miners is clearly the Broncos' best offensive player right now and he plays right guard?
I think it's terrible news, not to say that Quinn Miners isn't a good guy, or the fact that you have a weapon on the offensive line, because the offensive line obviously is important. But if you look at the 4 teams that remained in the playoffs last season, I mean, the Detroit Lions and the San Francisco 49ers from the NFC, you see, I mean, you could go George Kittle. You could have gone so many different ways as it pertains to the best offensive player being a weapon. Trent Williams was so great on offensive line, but I don't think you look at him being like, oh, the 49ers are here because their left tackle is their best offensive player. And then if you look at the AFC, obviously Lamar Jackson, Patrick Mahomes, they have weapons. They have people on the offensive side of the ball that can get it done. And while they might have some good offensive linemen, the fact that your offensive lineman
Joe
is your best player doesn't result in wins.
But nobody says Joe Thuney is the best player on the offensive side of the ball for the Kansas City Chiefs. And he's probably as good a guard, maybe a little more seasoned than Quinn Miners right now. And, that's just the start of the differences between the Chiefs and the Broncos. But I agree with you. And that's part of the problem. You're still looking, and I don't think Nix is necessarily this kind of quarterback, but you're looking, aren't you, Sean, for some type of explosiveness out of this offense, big play capability, game-breaking talent. And the story right now seems to be Cortland Sutton and his appearance at minicamp this week and what he had to say. What did you make of that the other day?
I thought it was like our generation's version of subtweeting. Like not actually going out there and saying directly what you want to say, but having these subtle digs and, liking certain posts on Instagram. It's kind of the world that we live in today. But there were a couple instances that he said something and I was like, are people listening to how he's saying this and to what he's actually saying? I mean, I give him credit for showing up to mandatory minicamp. If I had to show up to my job and I was going to get fined, I would definitely show up. It was voluntary. I don't show up to anything voluntary for my work. But listen, at the end of the day, I do think that Cortland Sutton is upset with the situation. Now, I don't know if it's 1,000% have to do with his contract. It does feel like he might be a little bit bitter with the Russell Wilson thing because no one asked him about Russell Wilson, and he brought him up out of nowhere and tried to give him
anyway.
as much flowers as he could. So I do think it's a situation where it's not something that's at the end, like it's not Quinn Miners, like you said. It's not Patrick Surtain going up there and complaining about their contract. It's Cortland Sutton, who, let's be honest, if he was on a Super Bowl winning team, he probably would be the second or the third option at the wide receiver position. So it's something to monitor. But at the end of the day, also, you want to have Cortland Sutton out there because aside from Sutton at the wide receiver position, I mean, Marvin Mims didn't get that many targets last year. We're hoping that his targets go up this season, but Cortland Sutton's an established veteran in this league, and that's what Bo Nix is going to need if he's going to have any success in his rookie campaign.
That the Sutton term stalemate was used more than once too. That's never good.
Stalemate.
Yes, stalemate is not great, and obviously for the Broncos, I've said before, I'll continue to say the best result for all parties, and I think the one that we'll end up with is probably a trade at some point. But yeah, at that point, you're subtracting talent, and I get it. Last year, for example, the very top offensive teams in points did not necessarily go as far as you might think, but point differential certainly you did. And 2 years ago, it was the Chiefs and the Eagles were the two highest scoring teams in the league. So you can say what you will about defense, and it's important, but now we're in an era of offense, and now we're in an era of quarterbacks. And in the AFC, when you look at the quarterbacks across the board, it is stunningly deep. The roster is shockingly deep. What would be a good year for Bo Nix in his rookie campaign with the Broncos?
I think if he throws for about 3,500 yards, 20 touchdowns, 11 interceptions, that's something that you can build off. What you don't want to do, and I know Peyton Manning talked about it, is you don't want to set the rookie record for interceptions, turnovers, because that's something that's going to drive Sean Payton absolutely berserk. So I think if he's able to just have, middle of the pack, I don't even think he needs to be a top 15 quarterback in the NFL because, like you said, the AFC has so many elite quarterbacks, and the NFC doesn't exactly have the level or, the quantity of elite quarterbacks, but there are top-heavy quarterbacks in the NFC as well. So I think if he's middle of the pack, maybe a top 20 statistically ranked quarterback, then that's something to believe in that he can build on next year because that Sean Payton's only going to expand that playbook as he is able to digest more and more of that information. So I think he needs to be a middle of the pack quarterback. He can't be a situation where you're the worst quarterback in the league because at the end of the day, there's three quarterbacks that are going to be battling for this spot. We all know that Bo Nix is Sean Payton's guy. He selected him with a 12th overall pick in this year's draft. He has to be middle of the pack, and he has to, at the end of the season, be producing better than what Russell Wilson was producing at the end of the season last year. I think doing a side-by-side statistics as the season goes on will be a kind of a fun activity that we're going to do, but especially in that final stretch where Russell Wilson, after that 5-game winning streak, started to turn the ball over, you saw his production go down. In Bo Nix's case, if he has low production in the beginning of the season, but is trending up towards the end of the season, I think that's something that Broncos country can get behind.
I'm not trying to pick on our friends from the East Coast, Mick, but you're not hearing any steam about Zach Wilson having a chance at this starting job, are you?
No, I don't know about you guys, but I hate these stupid Twitter accounts that are like MLF football or like whatever, and they paid Elon Musk as much money as they needed for the stupid little gold check mark. But yeah, like what the heck is going on with some of these accounts that quote unquote cover the NFL? Like Sean Payton says, yeah, we're going to have competition at all positions this season, including the quarterback position. And then somebody in New York is like, did you see Sean Payton says Zach Wilson has a chance? I find it funny that like all the national media, I saw somebody do a segment today on the 2 middle fingers with Sean Payton. I'm like, dude, like you obviously didn't listen to the press conference. You literally just saw that trending on Twitter and jumped on it. But yeah, it is interesting, the national narrative as it pertains to the Denver Broncos, because it feels like at this point, nobody actually wants to talk about the team, which I get. There's not a lot of intrigue as it pertains to players and storylines, but it feels like when Sean Payton says something funny, then all of a sudden people want to jump on it or use Zach Wilson, who played in the New York market, to generate clicks on social media, which I always think is pretty funny.
It is obviously going to be an interesting season, but look, it's very straightforward. Bo Nix is the guy. They're building around it. It's probably going to be hard. We're with you, Mick. We think they're going to win 6 or 7 games. It's going to be a backslide, but that doesn't necessarily mean that it's not progress. But it means for 2024, for Broncos fans that are hoping for an instant fix, probably not going to happen. You want to make sure that you follow Mick, everything that he's doing over at, he doesn't have one of those bad social media accounts that he was referring to. It's actually good with real news. So go follow Mick and make sure you check him out over at Fox31 in Denver, and check out the Colorado Sports Night program as well. Does a terrific job hosting that with Arn Anderson and Taylor Kilgore, Bruce Hurdle sometimes as well over on KWGN. Always good to talk to you, my friend. Appreciate it.
Appreciate it, guys. Thanks for having me on. Have a good off season.
Thanks so much. And it finally is sort of the off season, right?
The next 6 weeks.
The next 6 weeks. That's it. It is not the off season for the Colorado Rockies. That'll come immediately after the final game of the regular season. But what will they do in between? We'll talk about that in a moment on their off day. But want to remind you that you have probably over the last 4 years been inundated, overwhelmed by the sports betting ads that you have seen them, heard them. You might have some of them committed to memory by now. And so it can be complicated, especially if you're thinking of getting into the fun and figuring out what the best way to jump in for you is. What's the best offer for you? What the best offer for you is might be different than the best offer for someone else. So we're going to add one more sports betting part to the pile, but this one is going to make it easier. Mile High Sports has gathered all of the best sign-up bonuses and offers, put them all on one page on our website. We wanted to make it easy for folks who are interested in betting to find the best options. So we've been researching all of them. We bring them all together for you in a way that makes it simple to know what's available. That can be bonus bets or second chance bets, deposit matches, everything all in one place in a spot where you can look at all of the different books, all of their different offers, and decide what's best for you, not necessarily for them, but for you. So visit milehighsports.com today or download our mobile app and click on Colorado Sports Betting. You'll get all of that all in one place, and you can pick out the way you want to jump into the sports betting world. We make it easy as we can for you right there at milehighsports.com and then Colorado Sports Betting. It's that simple. Think of it as your bonus from your friends right here at Mile High Sports. Sandy, the Rockies, after coughing up 17 runs to the Twins yesterday, needed the day off. They'll be back for a long 10-game homestand starting tomorrow. But the trade deadline is going to be upon us sooner rather than later. And for the Colorado Rockies, a team that is undergoing a rebuild, and quite frankly, a rebuild with some very good signs involved in it. Some of the young players that we've talked about do seem to be blossoming. The idea that some of the players will be on the block. We've talked about two in particular, Elias Diaz, that the Chicago Cubs in particular have reportedly been talking about for about a month. But Diaz in the final year of his contract, a good hitting catcher who is not a bad defensive catcher either. He's maybe not elite, but he's good, and he's an outstanding hitter with good pop. So Diaz in the final year of his contract is probably going to be in demand for a lot of contending teams. That seems like the kind of trade the Rockies and GM Bill Schmidt would make, because Diaz likely at this point in his career, if he has options to go somewhere else after the season, will probably take them. So maybe Diaz moves on. But for a Rockies team that loves its own players, especially the ones that they've drafted and the homegrown guys, can you imagine them moving on from anybody else during the trade period?
I cannot necessarily imagine them moving on from anybody else. Tovar's untouchable.
Oh, yeah. You wouldn't even talk about Tovar.
You wouldn't talk about him. I don't think Monteros is marketable.
No, you're not talking about. Montero is probably not at this point.
And
part of the Nolan Arenado trade.
I don't know. Brendan Rodgers, maybe, but he's hurt right now.
He's hurt.
So, yes, I would restrict it to Diaz and maybe one or two of the guys out of the bullpen. Although, again, I don't know how much you're getting for Jalen Beek or Victor Vodnik. I just don't know that you would get anything. But I think what the Rockies have to be thinking about, whether it's Diaz or Ryan McMahon or maybe even Rodgers. I mean, the deadline is 6 weeks away.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, there's time. And Rodgers right now is hurt.
He's hurt right now, but in 6 weeks, presumably he'd be healthy. We'll see. But they have to be looking for pitching prospects. Yeah. Because
that would be the best.
You're never going to get a top flight free agent pitcher to sign here. That was true in 1993, 94, 95, when they had just opened Coors Field in 1995, and it wasn't even a full, complete season. The first full season played at Coors Field was 1996. That was true then, and it's true today. You're not going to get pitchers to come here. Established pitchers will not come here. With the humidor, it
doesn't really matter.
They said it still won't come here. So you've got to develop, trade for prospects, and the Rockies are a different type of organization.
It's a nice way
they are famous for being the icons of inactivity at the trade deadline.
What was the term thrown around in an article earlier this week about?
It's like playing for a team in the Stone Age.
That's not exactly what you wanted to hear.
They are not one of the more progressive, forward-thinking, aggressive organizations in Major League Baseball.
The excitement about Adael Amador, of course, brought up when Rogers was hurt, the top prospect that the Rockies had. But keep in mind, we mentioned this when he came up. It's great that the Rockies this was something they had not done really as an organization. They never brought up their top prospect to see them for a couple weeks. And that's why I think people look at Amador and say, well, he's got to be here to stay, because the Rockies never do that. They really are. And this time, Brendan Rodgers is going to be healthy, presumably at the end of his time off the injured list. He was on the 10-day. And Amador is probably going back down. The Rockies wanted to see how he adjusted and adapted to Major League play, but he was only batting 194 at AA Hartford. So there's still some seasoning there to be had. But it is a good sign that they do seem to be a little more committed to the youth movement. I don't know if Brendan Rodgers gets you much of anything unless he comes back and really starts to play very well, although he was hitting better and playing better before the injury. And I guess you could move on. But Amador is not ready. That wouldn't be the answer right now to call up the 21-year-old out of AA and just plant him there. He needs a little more time. And on a Rockies team that isn't competing for anything right now, you afford to give him that time. I guess if Rodgers gives you the right thing, you consider it. Diaz, I think you have to make a deal. And then I go back to Ryan McMahon, who I understand that Ryan McMahon is a player that fans are familiar with, and he's having a good year, but the batting average has started to drop again.
Yes.
The plate discipline has started to drop again.
True.
That's a concern, and you're talking about a guy that's going to be 30. And when the Rockies are finally all good, when Tovar and Doyle and hopefully Nolan Jones when he comes back, and Amador, and all these guys are ready to go, maybe Drew Romo behind the plate, Zach Veen in right field, is Ryan McMahon at 34 years old going to be the guy that's going to help you with that? These are the moves the Rockies have to start making while they can make them. And one, to me, rules out the other. Brendan Rodgers doesn't have a big contract. Now, Ryan McMahon doesn't have a huge contract by baseball standards, but it's one of the biggest on the team. And Rodgers can play third. So I look at it and think that you're not delaying anybody. If you move McMahon on and you get yourself, let's say, a quality prospect or maybe two for the pitching, then Rodgers goes over to third. Amador can take second when he's ready. And in the meantime, you can find a utility infielder that can hold down the fort. But I just do wonder, with the GM, Bill Schmidt, being the guy formerly of scouting, partly responsible for bringing some of these guys, if not many of these guys in, it can be hard to move on from the guys that you've had since day one. This seems to be a consistent problem the Rockies have. They overvalue their own guys, and they often wait too long to trade them. I look at it, you have to go back a little bit, but I look at Dexter Fowler, who the Rockies probably traded 3 years too late when they could have gotten a lot for him. And then they eventually realized, well, I guess he's not going to help us that much, and he didn't get anything. You have to strike while the iron's hot. I'm not convinced that this ownership and this GM are the guys that are going to do that.
The old philosophy, better to trade a year too early than a year too late.
Absolutely.
Is a philosophy the Rockies have never followed.
No.
With the possible exception of Bob Gebhardt.
Gebhardt was more aggressive than probably anybody.
He was a little more.
Dan O'Dowd, Gebhardt was more aggressive.
The Dylan Dan O'Dowd was, shuffling chairs on the deck of the Titanic.
Yeah, oftentimes.
Never, I think every time I think of Dan O'Dowd's time here, I think of the wooden phrase, never confuse or mistake activity for achievement.
Right.
I mean, Dan O'Dowd was active in the trade market, but how many Dan O'Dowd trades really represented great moves? I mean, actually, the Matt Holliday trade turned out with Cargo Gonzalez,
Mhm.
be one of the better
Probably one of the better ones.
deals he made. But here's the problem with the Rockies, and we touched on this, but just to broaden out the perspective. There are 15 teams in the National League. There are 3 teams running away with their divisions. The Dodgers are up by 6.5 over San Diego in the West. Milwaukee's ahead of Cincinnati by 7, the Cubs by 7, St. Louis by 7, and Pittsburgh by 7.5 in the Central. Philadelphia is 10 games ahead of Atlanta in the East. So we know who the 3 division winners are going to be.
Right.
I know it's only June.
I think you're right.
Closing in on mid-June, right, or even surpassing it. I don't know that you can look at the Rockies being 9.5 games out of a potential wild card playoff spot, the 3rd wild card position. And the only other team that's further back is Miami in the entire National League. You've got those 3 teams at the top, but you've got 12 other teams, right? 10 of those 12 teams are realistically going for the 3 wildcard spots. The only teams who are out of contention in the entire National League are Colorado and Miami. In the American League, it's a little different. You've got Houston, the Angels, Oakland, and the White Sox somewhere between 5.5 games and 19.5 games out of the final wildcard playoff spot. So you've got twice as many teams in the American League who are out of it. American League's a much stronger league. The Rockies are in the weaker league. They're in a division where the collective run differential is -24. The Rockies contributing to that at -114.
Ugh.
It's such a shame. Miami, this was sort of expected. And I know with the Rockies, it's expected, but it continues to be, I think, serious baseball fans around here who aren't serious does not mean unrealistically demanding.
Right.
It just means be in the mix, be in the race, be within 5 games of a playoff spot. Is that too much to ask? For 10 of the 12 teams competing for wild card spots, it's not hard. The Mets are a mess. They're 3.5 games out of the wild card race.
For the Rockies, obviously injuries have played a role, but that's one of the reasons that the Rockies have to consider things too. You signed the proverbial pig in a poke with Chris Bryant. And by the way, go to the Denver Post today. Check out Patrick Saunders' terrific column on the Rockies today, detailing all of the injury history with Chris Bryant prior to the Rockies acquiring him, and fairly wondering what the Rockies knew or didn't know or chose to ignore when signing Chris Bryant to that $182 million deal. But Chris Bryant is out. Nolan Jones is out. Okay, that's different. Youngster Jordan Beck is out. Those are guys that, at least in Jones and Rogers and Beck's case, you believe the best is yet to come. When it comes to the pitching, Germán Marquez with Tommy John, Antonio Senzatella, long-term injury. Kyle Freeland has had injury after injury after injury. The odds are very good, and I hope I'm wrong on all 3 of them, but the odds are very good that for all 3 of those players who are expected to be the 1, 2, and 3 guys atop the Rockies rotation this year, in whatever order, their best days are probably behind all 3 of them. And what you don't want in Coors Field is guys who their best days are behind them that are trying to go ahead and ramp things up. And that leads to the injuries you see again with Marquez and Senzatella. So now you're missing these kind of players who, when you get them back, so far so good, but their best days are almost certainly behind them. You have to replenish the farm system. And to do that, you have to draft well. They certainly went after Chase Dollander last year out of Tennessee, who seems to be bouncing back. But again, that wasn't an immediate. It's not Steven Strasburg. He's not coming right to the majors. You're going to have to be able to trade for some high-end prospects. And to do that, maybe that means you have to move on from Ryan McMahon. But you better do it a year early rather than a year late. The Rockies will take on the Pittsburgh Pirates starting tomorrow to start that big homestand. They'll take on the Pirates Friday this weekend, and then 4 games with the Dodgers to begin next week. A big opportunity for the Rockies, I guess, to make a statement at home. But for what end? As you pointed out, it's that April start. Already sank them. It's a little too little.
They were done by April. And, you know, we've always joked around here, if they could just take us up to the 4th of July. That was many years ago.
Right. First, it was Broncos training camp.
Right.
Now it's
training camp. Then it was 4th of
now
July.
It's like May 15th.
Then it was Memorial Day.
Yeah.
Then it was Mother's Day. And this year,
like May 1st.
It was by the end of April that they were out of contention.
Yeah,
I mean, it's hard in 1 month, especially the first month, to move yourself completely out of playoff contention, but the Rockies managed to do it. And on into May for about a week in starting 8-28. And since they've been more or less a 500 team. In fact, exactly a 500 team.
And to do that, to their credit and manager Bud Black's credit, means that you're focusing on the things you need to focus on, and that helps you at times get your checkup from the neck up, right? We talk about mental health and focus and how that can improve your performance. Well, you want to improve your performance, Sandy's got the guy for you.
Mental Health Month here in the month of June. And Dr. Rick Perea and I spoke about that on our weekly podcast. And yes, it's every Wednesday afternoon on Mile High Sports Radio. You get your checkup from the neck up on Wellness Wednesday from Dr. Rick Perea, one of the foremost performance psychologists in America. And yes, Rick works with a lot of major professional sports athletes. He works with a ton of major professional sports teams, some major college football programs as well. And yet he cuts a wide swath. He works in speaking in front of corporate audiences. He has worked with some celebrities, some very well-known individuals outside of sports, and he can help you. In fact, he'd rather help you, especially here in the Denver metro area, than almost anything else he does. And you can reach him, the former lead psychologist for the 2015 world champion Denver Broncos and the 2023 champion Denver Nuggets. You can reach him at 720-287-0933. That's 720-287-0933, or look him up at Dr. P at think1-4u.org. That's think1-4u.org.
I want to point out, by the way, that if you haven't had a chance to listen to the Wellness Wednesdays with Dr. Rick Perea, this week's in particular, Sandy ended up joining the good doctor. It is really an extraordinary listen, and I could not recommend it more, to take the time to listen to it, because there's a lot of really important things, stuff that people don't talk about, and you don't talk about them until sometimes, unfortunately, it's too late. And it's an extraordinary listen. It's an emotional listen. It's a valuable listen. I thought that the two of you were tremendous, and I could not recommend it enough. Please go check it out. The Wellness Wednesdays and with Dr. Rick Perea, you can check that right out of Mile High Sports and right here at the Mile High Sports, everywhere you can get all the podcasts. Well worth listening to. And we'll turn our attention to the NBA Finals, where last night, one of the things that supposedly never happens, a star fouls out in a important game. Luka Doncic fouls out of game 3 with 4 minutes and 12 seconds remaining in the game, in which the Dallas Mavericks were in the middle of a 22-2 run that saw them cut the game with the Celtics down to 1 at one point. And Doncic ended up fouling out correctly, an egregious blocking foul in which, you can't say you're planted when he's literally in midair, and against Jaylen Brown was the correct foul. But one of the things that I thought was really striking about this is a report by ESPN's Brian Windhorst after the game, which pulled no punches whatsoever about one of the issues that Luka Doncic has had. And I couldn't help but think about one of the local stars here when I heard what Windhorst had to say.
Yeah, I thought it was perfect that Luka fell onto the ground there in an unacceptable position to put himself in with 4 minutes left with 5 fouls, and then immediately looks at the bench and says, "You better bleeping challenge it," as if it's the bench's fault that he just made a terrible play. I'm standing here in the Mavericks tunnel. Over there is the Celtics tunnel. That's where the winners are. If Luka's ever going to be a winner coming out of this tunnel here, he is going to have to use what's happened in this finals as a learning experience. His defensive performance is unacceptable. unacceptable. He is a hole on the court. The Celtics are attacking him. They are ahead in this series because they have attacked him defensively. And you've got a situation here where Luka is complaining about the officiating. They have begged him. They have talked with him. They have pleaded with him. He is costing his team because of how he treats the officials. He's a brilliant player. He does so many things well. They are here because of how he did. His performance in this game is unacceptable and the reason why the Mavericks are not going to win. He's got to get over this. And the fact that he came out after the game and blamed the officials showed me he's nowhere close yet. So maybe over the summer somebody will get to him because nobody with the Mavericks or anybody else in his life has. And that's where the Mavericks are at this point. They're never going to get to this tunnel with the trophy if he doesn't improve those aspects of his game.
Brian Windhorst.
For him to stop complaining about the officials. Here's what Doncic said after the game. Quote, we couldn't play physical. I don't want to say nothing. 6 fouls in the NBA Finals. Basically, I'm like this. And he kind of put his hands out. So come on, man. Better than that. It's the insinuation like, how dare you foul me out of a game? Look, at a certain point, I get the frustration, but this has been an issue for Doncic. And guess what? You're not going to get the benefit of the doubt when you're haranguing the officials all night long.
He's the boy who cries wolf. I mean, every foul is absolutely unacceptable. I mean, it's always the wrong call. Nikola Jokic used to be a little like this.
Not this bad.
He was never as bad as Doncic.
But there were similarities. And Jokic over the last couple of years, of course, attended every time he was brushed, would have the same expression, would sometimes jog down the court, spending time hollering at the referees. And he grew up. And he did grow up. And he's done that less and less. He's understood the game's going to be what it is. I can't control what the officials do. And the only thing you can actually do is make it worse. Doncic, Jokic's good friend, hopefully can learn that lesson because he's an extraordinary player. He's a tremendous watch. He's a treat to watch. But Windhorst is exactly right. He is the reason they're in the finals. And he's not the only reason they're going to lose the finals. The Celtics are just better top to bottom. But he's the biggest reason they're going to lose the finals because the expectation on him is so high and the production has been so consistent that when he is now worried about the wrong thing and clearly not in the right headspace, this is going to be a sweep. They're going to get blown out, and it probably happens in the next game. Doncic is going to have to realize he has two choices. You have two ways to go in this. You can go the way Jokic did, and you can realize I'm not helping myself and I have to grow up a little bit. And then you can find yourself maybe hoisting the trophy. Or you can complain and complain and complain, and you can go another route. And you can go a route that we've seen a lot of NBA players and good NBA players, maybe not as good as Jokic have done, but find a way to basically become a burr in referees' saddles forever. You turn into a Ron Artest meta world piece. You can there's been a history of terrific players who weren't able to reach or stay at their peak because they simply got the reputation of being trouble. And they never bothered to grow up out of it. And Doncic right now is at that fork in the road. And this lesson is going to be a hard one. I'm curious to see what he takes out of it.
We were talking yesterday about the late Jerry West. Jerry West never said a word to officials. Wilt Chamberlain occasionally would argue with officials, but Wilt never fouled out of a game. One of the reasons Wilt never fouled out of a game was because he didn't make it a practice of debating or showing up officials. And he would get the benefit of the doubt. And Wilt also was very proud of the fact that he never fouled out of a game. So when he got the 4 or 5 fouls, he was very careful not to pick up a sixth or even come close. I draw that portrait as a contrast with Doncic, who clearly committed numbers 4, 5, and 6 late in the game. They were all fouls, and nobody in his right mind, and I must confess, I did listen to some of the radio call, and on the part of the play-by-play man, who will go nameless, it was disgracefully bad. He bought into all the Doncic whining. Thankfully, PJ Carlissimo was doing the analysis on the game, and he fired right back. And there was no question to me. Yes, they had to challenge it. And Windhorst is right. Doncic made a big show of saying, you better challenge. Well, of course they were going to challenge. It was a sixth foul. They hadn't challenged before. They could challenge it. It was worth a shot, but there was no chance, none.
He was
that call was going to be reversed
in midair.
None. And Carlissimo kept saying, well, you have to look at the play.
Can't take a charge in midair.
Brown's body is passing Doncic. It's not that he's set up with his chest and it's a chest-to-chest hit and there's clearly established position. He's moving. He's in the air. It's the very definition of a blocking call.
And it's one that, quite frankly, six foul or no, or with the star, it's egregious to let it go.
Here's what the problem is with Doncic. And I will say this in fairness. He is playing hurt and probably injured.
I agree. And I think that's part of the equation. He is really playing
He is being attacked defensively, especially last night in the fourth quarter when the Celtics were really struggling. They had one field goal in more than 6.5 minutes at one point in the fourth quarter. But when push came to shove, when they cut it to one at 93-92, they went right at Doncic with Jaylen Brown, basically.
As Jason Kidd pointed out, maybe their best player.
No, but they that was intentional.
Yeah.
And they did it right throughout the game. And I thought if there were one of the two players with more of a defensive reluctance, it would have been Kyrie. I think Kyrie is actually throughout this series played decent defense. His offense finally showed up last night in the form of 35 points. Very efficient game all around for Kyrie. But for this guy to foul out the way he did was irresponsible.
He had 4 fouls in the fourth quarter.
It's unbelievable. He wasn't in any kind of foul trouble. He had 2 fouls going into the fourth quarter. They're on this massive run. It's 91-70. You blink, and it's 93-92. They're on this massive run, and he somehow, through all that, finds a way to pick up fouls number 3, 4, 5, and finally 6, with still a fair amount of time left in the
4
game.
minutes.
4 minutes to go in a game. They had a shot. I never thought they were going to win the game, even when they got to within a point. But one of the reasons I felt that way is because I thought all Boston had to do was go to Jaylen Brown and just attack Doncic and pick and roll or whatever, one-on-one. And he was going to get where he needed to go defensively, at least a step late every time. And yes, maybe his injuries had something to do with that, but his manner had everything to do with it. Listen, I'm not pretending that complaining to the officials began with the modern day player.
No.
Oscar whined all the time when he played. Rick Barry, much as I like Rick, and Rick is one of the most underrated players ever to play in the NBA. He was on officials all the time, but not like this. Not like this. And, of course, they weren't reviewing calls back when those guys played, but they were never as bad. On the court or off the court, never as bad with respect to officials as Doncic is today. He's the worst I've ever seen.
You brought up a good point, however, in Doncic's defense. He is sort of the reason that they're there when you're talking about the plus minuses. He's the only guy as a starter that was a plus.
And he was +9 last night.
Right. Yeah. Although Jaylen Brown, who spent a time attacking him, was the best of any of the 10 starters. Plus 13.
That's right.
But coming out at the end of the last game, you saw Doncic had an ice wrap on his thigh, ice wrap on his chest. We know that he took a pain-killing shot in his chest. Fortunately, did not have whatever doctor gave it to Tyrod Taylor a few years ago when he was with the Chargers. But he is playing injured. He's playing injured. And if this was a regular season game, he wouldn't even be he'd probably be out for more than a week if it was the regular season. And I get that, and I get the frustration, but you still have to recognize the situation. You maybe were in the spot where you could get a puncher's chance to have a 2-1 series. Now the series is 3-0 for Boston. And historically, since teams have gone to best of 7, the record for teams that have down 0-3, 0-156. And if that wasn't bad enough, in the 156 times, only 4 of them have ever even taken it to a game 7
And the Nuggets against Utah in 1994
was one of them.
was one of those series that got forced to a 7th game.
But they didn't win it either.
They didn't win it either.
This thing is over. The Celtics are going to win, and they will
That's right.
probably sweep.
That's right.
And Doncic is going to have to probably, as the best player, as maybe a guy that is the most exciting player in the league, he's going to have to wear that. And the way he responds to it, and yes, he's been injured, and yes, I think people understand that. It's a big situation for him, and hopefully he takes the right lessons from it. And go call his friend Nikola Jokic, who's gone through maybe not the exact same thing because it wasn't quite as bad.
Something similar.
But something very similar, and certainly might be able to get some advice there. We'll get to the Stanley Cup Final in a moment, but I want to remind you, a month from today, so you have 1 month exactly, the 4th annual Colorado Whiskey Fest is coming to the Douglas County Fairgrounds on Saturday, July 13th. Food, wine, beer, and spirits. Vendors will be on site. And of course, the whiskey vendors, you can imagine more than 50 of them, 50 plus. So if you like whiskey, this is your spot. This festival takes place from 11 a.m. to 5 p.m. Live music from Mojo Filter and the Kevin Austin Band. Tickets are available online now. If you use the promo code MHS, Mile High Sports, you'll save $15. Not 15%, $15. If you're 21 or over, you can go check out the Colorado Whiskey Fest presented by the Whiskey Cartel. You can get those tickets at whiskeyfestcolorado.com today. And remember to use promo code MHS to save $15 on your tickets. So go check out the 4th annual Colorado Whiskey Fest at the Douglas County Fairgrounds 1 month from today, Saturday, July 13th. Going to the Stanley Cup Final. The Panthers have a 2-0 lead, not a 3-0 lead, but it could be 3-0 as soon as tonight. Florida has outscored the high-scoring Oilers 7-1 in the first 2 games, but now the series does move to Edmonton. The story around it, obviously, late in Game 2, Leon Draisaitl, not exactly a guy known for being an enforcer, right? I mean, we're talking about one of the top 10 scorers in the league every single year. Basically went headhunting. Along the side of the board, Alexander Barkov had his head down a little bit, but Draisaitl led with an elbow, went right to Barkov's head. Barkov was hurt. Fortunately, he will indeed play tonight. Draisaitl even left his skates to do it. Inexplicably, he's not fined. He's not suspended. The 2-minute minor is all that you've gotten. Draisaitl said, I looked at it. I think we know that I'm not a player that plays with an intent to injure anybody by any means. I have no track record of that. The last part for sure is true. He doesn't have a track record, which makes me think that knowing that Barkov has essentially, as much as you can in hockey, has just been marking Connor McDavid. That felt to me as a desperation, like we can't score. These guys are stuffing our top line. They're stuffing McDavid. And if we can't do something to Barkov, this series is over. That's what it felt like to me.
It felt to me in the 3rd period of Game 2 as if Edmonton gooned it up.
Yep.
And not with guys you would consider to be enforcers necessarily.
Exactly.
Including Draisaitl, quite obviously. But you can say that a play that a player makes is dirty without calling him a dirty player per se.
But that was a dirty play.
Clear intent to injure with the elbow and the force of the hit, as you mentioned, leaving his skates to make the hit. And it was a joke, frankly, that he only got 2 minutes, but they did score on a power play. They did score on a power play and help cinch the game by scoring on that power play. So Edmonton did pay a price. The good news is that Barkov apparently is set to play tonight in Game 3. That's the good news. Good. And the NHL has a way of waiting on these things. And if it turns out that Barkov is going to miss the rest of the series, let's say, maybe you give Draisaitl a 1-game suspension. But since Barkov is playing tonight and technically only missed, most of the 3rd period of Game 2, but otherwise played, I think he had over 17 minutes of ice time in the game, and they were ahead and had the game pretty well put away by the time he went out, or certainly during the subsequent power play. They put the game away. I guess, but I'm surprised that a team that I thought had as much class as Edmonton customarily displays would resort to that sort of nonsense in a game that wasn't necessarily out of reach when they began to goon it up. But I agree with you completely that they are completely frustrated. They got one past Bobrovsky the other night,
2 games,
but
that's
otherwise in 2 games, that's it. And again, this is a team that during the regular season averaged over 3.5 goals a game. In the playoffs going into the Stanley Cup Final, they were averaging, I believe, exactly 3.5 goals per game. So their scoring really didn't go down much, if at all, during the Stanley Cup playoffs. And all of a sudden, they're up against this Florida team, as both of us predicted before the series began. Even if you thought Edmonton would be a little more competitive in the games, Edmonton would be facing a different animal, not only in Bobrovsky between the pipes, but defensively overall. And it starts with Barkov, who is the best
defensive forward in the the best two-way forward.
I think in the game. I don't think there's much question about that. Absolutely. And he's very good offensively, but even better defensively. And it wasn't mere coincidence that they went after him rather than, let's say, a Tkachuk.
Well, I tell you why they go after Tkachuk. Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, obviously, you know how that goes. But
and Paul Maurice, I thought Florida, basically the message after the game, at least among the players, was don't say anything. We won. We're up 2-0. Don't stir things up. So they basically said, well, we didn't really see it, and so on. Paul Maurice didn't say that, at least not after the game. He didn't. Right. He was very, very upset and cooled off maybe a little bit the next day. I'm assuming he cooled off a little more when he found out Barkov probably was going to play in Game 3.
Tkachuk, of course, was a bit of an agitator for a long time in Edmonton when he was starting his career with the Flames, and was a pretty rough and tumble type player as well. They've had a couple different situations where they were, scrappers and fights, and it'll be interesting to see how that shakes out too. But
I don't know what Edmonton can do, though. I really don't.
I don't either. I think this will be a sweep. I think Florida's been the best team in hockey all year long.
I think they've been the best team for about 14 months.
Yeah,
they got hot in the playoffs last year.
Yep.
And I think, they lost to Las Vegas. Listen, the better team won, but Florida was not nearly as healthy last year as it seems to be this year, and the breaks seem to be going their way. I mean, the Barkov hit could have resulted in his missing the rest of the series. Mm-hmm. But maybe it's like the Porzingis deal in the NBA Finals. Maybe it really doesn't matter. And you know what? Barkov doesn't play 25 minutes a game. Their top 6, even their top 9 forwards, they distribute the ice time fairly evenly among the top 9 forwards.
Thus far,
in Florida's case, not in Edmonton's case, they don't do that.
Yeah, in the first 2 games of the Cup Finals, the only forward that's even averaged more than 20 minutes is Reinhart.
Right.
At 21. He's the only one.
He's the one.
Only sitting there at just under 15 minutes.
And that's because he plays on a power play a lot.
Right.
And Edmonton got penalized 45 minutes worth of penalties in Game 2.
Yeah. Old friend Evan Rodriguez with 3 goals in 2 games.
How about being the third star in Game 1 and the first star in Game 2?
And
you're a man.
Yeah, given the Oilers something else to think about, obviously. And yeah, to me, the Oilers just look frustrated. I think they understood there were only so many ways that they could win this series, and they were going to have to be winning high-scoring games, and they've scored 1 goal in 2 games against a Florida defense that is absolutely stifling. Now, obviously, Edmonton gets last change in their home games, and perhaps that will make a difference. Certainly was an advantage for Florida.
I mean, you can only do so much. I mean, they're putting McDavid, Draisaitl, and Hyman together
because you've got to get something,
whether they're on the road or at home,
right?
Quite a bit. And I'm sure they'll do it tonight in game number 3. Whether they're at home or on the road, they're going to load up with those guys.
If Florida gets the first goal of this
game, but if those guys don't score, they won't score.
I'll go as far as say if Florida gets the first goal of this game tonight, forget about tonight. This series is a sweep. I think Edmonton is teetering. I think they're that close to being beaten mentally in this series. I think they understand that they don't have the depth that Florida has. They don't have the discipline that Florida has. That's been shown already. They don't have the goaltender Florida has. Bobrovsky might end up winning the Conn Smythe. They don't have the defensive ability in the forecheck. The only thing they have that's better than Florida is the scoring punch of McDavid and Draisaitl. of which that at least Florida can't match. But if you shut those guys down.
But look at Edmonton on the few occasions it's been on the power play. They haven't been able to do anything.
Right.
And going into the series in the playoffs, they were 37.5%.
Almost 38%
on a power play.
And they haven't made a dent. I mean, it's really a problem. Florida has absolutely locked them down. So I'm intrigued to see how that shakes out in this game.
And I would like to see Paul Maurice get a Stanley Cup. He's been a terrific coach for
two really good
time.
Coaching jobs this year. Obviously, Knobloch is comparatively new to it, but yeah, Maurice has been one of those guys that it feels like he's been due and maybe underrated for a long time.
I think he's been very underrated for a long, long time, and he hasn't coached in big markets. And Sunrise, Florida is not it's not Miami, though it's a suburb of Fort Lauderdale,
right?
And I think he took over. They were a good team, and all of a sudden the playoffs last year, they became a great team. And they were a great team this year. I mean, they were in the toughest division in hockey, battling with Boston all year long for first place. Toronto was a pretty distant third. And right at the end of the season, Florida overtook Boston, and they haven't looked back since.
Yeah, it's been very impressive. And remember, it's amazing. We talk about, it's Florida. It's not a big hockey market. It's been a Florida team in the Stanley Cup Finals for the last 5 years
in a row.
I mean, they're doing
and they
something
sell
right.
out all the games.
Yeah.
The Lightning do, and the Panthers do.
And the Panthers laughed off, of course, the travel delays. Of course, all the rain and flooding in Florida delayed their departure and therefore arrival in Edmonton. And the idea that, that was a concern. Kyle Okposo had a great quote about it. He said, it's so funny everything gets magnified in the Cup Finals. This happens 4 or 5 times a year to every team in the regular season. Nobody says anything. And
weather,
like, oh my God,
flights.
they're not going to be able to play. He said, I think we always knew he'd get here at some point, whether we got here at 2 a.m. or whatever, we were going to get here. Everyone was having fun.
Remember in the NCAA
honestly.
basketball tournament, they were all concerned because UConn had trouble.
Yeah.
With its travel plans. Don't recall it made much difference.
Wasn't a major issue. Paul Maurice had a great point about it too. He said, we pay a bunch of really smart people to have better answers than we do. This is the way we do it, and there are reasons for it, and I'm 100% good with it. At no point when a guy gets a cold do they come to see me on how they should fix it. We spent an hour at our rink, a little longer. We sat there, and our chef is unbelievable. The coaches put on 7 pounds yesterday. That's the only ramification. Evan Rodriguez said, we love adversity. We got more team bonding time. It was fun. Yeah. So, I mean, this is what happens.
That's the other thing. They really are. They're a close team.
Yeah, they are. And I am happy to see a guy like Rodriguez. He's one of those.
He's always been a favorite of yours.
Yeah. Because he's a kind of you would call him a glue guy. He plays well in big moments, although he's not a top scorer.
I agree.
But he's an outstanding third liner that can play in the second line. He's a versatile player. And when you get into this time of the year, when there have been some injuries, there's been some fatigue, having somebody who can do that's really valuable. And he's always been a teammate that people like. He gets in with a group and he bonds quickly. And I think you're seeing that with Florida again.
Look
another
at the teams
asset.
He's played
and
for.
Pittsburgh.
Pittsburgh,
Colorado,
Avs, Florida,
and Colorado would
winning
have kept
seems
him
to
if they
follow
could
him
have afforded
around.
him. Right. And after a while, when winning follows you around, maybe it's you. And so he could end up being the big winner. We will see as well. But obviously, it's going to be an interesting game tonight. What does it mean for the NBA and the NHL after good seasons, I guess, if both of these finals end up in sweeps? And I think there's a really good chance that's going to happen.
I think it's okay in the sense that Florida, and I think even more so Boston, has established itself and now is finishing off something that maybe in another year.
And Florida was in the finals last year.
Right. And Boston 2 years ago was in the finals. Boston's been the Eastern Conference Finals 6 of the last 8 years. So these teams have been upper echelon teams, and maybe less so with Paul Maurice, who's always been considered a good coach. But how about the transformation in the reputation of Joe Mazzulla, the coach of the Boston Celtics, who is now being looked on as someone who has expertly coached this team through the playoffs. I mean, 15-2. We thought the Nuggets were doing pretty dominant work last year, going 16-4. I don't think Boston's going to lose 4 games this year.
Doesn't look like they're going to lose any of the finals.
We're seeing, I think, deserving teams for the most part clearly deserving teams in recent years winning the Stanley Cup, winning the NBA title. And I think that's good for the sport. I think it's good for hockey, and I think it's good for the NBA too.
We'll find out. Stanley Cup Final is tonight. Of course, the Rockies are off. They'll be back at it against Pittsburgh tomorrow. We'll talk more about that tomorrow as well. The Broncos minicamp wraps up with Sean Payton seeing everything he needed to see. No practice necessary today, but we'll have more from minicamp and more to talk with you about it tomorrow as well. Thanks to Myck Miller for joining us, Fox31 in Denver, the host of Colorado Sports Night at KWGN. Make sure you check out Myck's social as well. Does a terrific job there. We will be back tomorrow. Danny Bailey's the man in the booth that makes everything work. You don't get to see him, but he's the only reason that you get to see us. So thanks to Danny Bailey, and thanks to you for watching.
We don't get to see him by comparison.
Yeah, we'd have a totally different audience if you flip the cameras around, for sure. Absolutely. But we'll be back at it tomorrow. Thanks to all of you who've been watching the program. If you'd like, there's that little button right there at the bottom. You can click and subscribe, and we'll let you know every time we're coming on every single weekday. We will be back tomorrow, but it's time for us to step away. For Sandy Clough, I'm Shawn Drotar. This is Mile High Sports.